I recently lived through my worst fear. The head of our HOA tried to enter my home uninvited using a master key, while my son was inside. Her reasoning, if you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind me coming in. Strange how the only thing hiding that day was her backbone. Once she realized that being HOA president doesn't mean much when you're trespassing on a Marine's porch. Let me rewind to how it all started. The trouble didn't begin with a fine or a nasty letter. It kicked off with a phone call that froze the blood in my veins. I was elbow deep under the hood of a client's old sedan, hands covered in grease, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I nearly ignored it. Job's a job. But then I saw the caller ID, my son, Leo. He never calls during the day unless something's wrong. I wiped my hand on my jeans and answered, "Everything all right, son?" I asked, already feeling the tension coil in my chest. A pause, then Leo's steady voice came through, calm, composed, typical Marine, nothing shakes him. "Dad," he said, voice low, "you need to come home now." That's all I needed. The wrench slipped from my grip, clanging against the concrete of my shop. I shouted to my partner that I had an emergency, and I was already in the truck before he could reply. The drive home was a blur, horns blaring, lights flashing, but I barely noticed. Leo was only home on leave for a couple of weeks. This was supposed to be his time to rest, not deal with a crisis. What could have gone so wrong that he'd make that call? I came to a screeching stop in our driveway and saw pure suburban pandemonium. 2 cop cars sat at the curb, lights casting red and blue strobes across the street. Neighbors were scattered on their lawns, watering flowers they didn't care about while watching our house like it was a soap opera. And there, dead center on my lawn, was Karen, our HOA president. She wore that title like royalty. Her usual look of sour superiority was replaced by a blotchy, red-faced fury. She was yelling, finger shaking in the direction of our front door. Beside her stood Richard, her husband. He always looked like he'd just stepped in something foul, and he was nodding furiously at everything she shouted. And on the porch stood Leo, silent, arms folded across his chest, a mountain of calm. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, a human fortress against the chaos. I cut through the crowd and stormed up my lawn. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice slicing through Karen's wailing. She spun toward me, while, "Died. Your son assaulted me," she shrieked. "I was doing a routine inspection, and he attacked me. I want him arrested." I glanced at Leo. He gave a small shake of his head. That was all I needed. He's the most disciplined man I know. Violence isn't in his nature unless absolutely necessary. I turned to one of the officers, young guy, clearly out of his depth. "Officer, can you explain what's happening here?" I asked, keeping my tone even. I had to stay cool. My temper's short, but with Leo involved, I had to be the adult. The officer sighed. "Ma'am here says she used a master HOA key to enter your home for an inspection. Your son opened the door and stopped her. She threw me off the porch," Karen added. "I have witnesses." Richard jumped in, whining, "That's right, he's dangerous, violent." Hearing him call a Marine a thug made my blood boil. Leo finally spoke, his tone loud and even. "She tried to force her way into our home. I blocked her. She hit me with her clipboard. I warned her to stop. When she didn't, I escorted her off the porch." He said it like he was giving a weather report. The officer looked between them. "Ma'am, did you have a warrant?" Karen opened and closed her mouth like a stunned fish. "I'm the HOA president. The bylaws give me the right." That's when the older officer stepped in. "Bylaws don't override state law, ma'am. You can't enter a private home without permission or a warrant. That's called breaking and entering." Richard looked like he was about to argue, but the officer's glare shut him up. Then Leo raised his phone. I recorded everything, from the second she stepped on the porch to when she slapped me. The color drained from Karen's face. She turned ghost white. Richard looked nauseous. The two officers shared a glance. The older one nodded. "That's enough for us." They told Karen and Richard to head home. A report would be filed. No arrest, yet. But the warning was loud and clear. As Karen stomped away, she shot me a glare that could freeze fire. It wasn't the look of someone wronged. It was the look of a ruler who'd lost face, a dictator who'd been humbled, and it was a warning, a silent promise that this wasn't over. As I watched her retreat, I felt a chill settle in my chest. She had tried the front door and been stopped. Now she'd try every other path. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something ugly. To understand why this all hit so hard, you need to know why I moved here. This neighborhood, with its picture, perfect homes and neatly trimmed lawns, was never my scene. I'm a hands, dirty engine grease kind of guy. I run an auto shop. I like grit and authenticity. These houses all looked like copies. But after my wife, Sarah, passed, the old place became too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts. My younger brother, Dave, everything I'm not, a suit-wearing lawyer, found this place. He's been my anchor for years. Said I needed a clean slate, a peaceful spot to raise Leo, and it was safe. Frank had told me there'd be no surprises, just calm, quiet living. For a while, he was right. Leo and I got comfortable. I transformed the garage into a pristine workspace, perfect for tackling my true passion project. Bessie, that 1978 Ford F-150 isn't just a truck. She's a masterpiece. I bought her when she was a corroded shell, and over 5 years, I rebuilt her from scratch. Every bolt tightened, every coat of gleaming cherry-red paint. My handiwork. When Leo was younger, he'd pass me tools, learning how to tell a piston ring from a gasket. Bessie's more than machinery. She's memory and meaning, a time capsule of the bond between father and son. In a neighborhood that often feels like someone else's mold, she's the one thing that's completely mine. When we first arrived, the area felt like a genuine community. People waved. Kids played ball in the streets. The HOA existed mostly to keep the pool clean and the grass in the park trimmed. The president then was a retired schoolteacher who mostly organized the yearly potluck. When she moved away to be near her grandkids, a new election was called. No one really wanted the position, except Karen. She ran like it was a Senate race, handing out brochures and promising to revive the prestige of the neighborhood. Richard, her husband, always hovered near her shoulder, whispering and holding her clipboard. He carried himself like he was crowning royalty, looking down his nose at everyone. With no opposition, they took over uncontested, and almost immediately the atmosphere changed. Friendly notes became stiff, official warnings. Simple common sense rules multiplied into pages of nonsense. The bylaws, once a thin handout, turned into a thick 3-ring binder. Suddenly, even your garden gnome's color had to be authorized. Mulch types had regulations. It was insanity. I kept my head down. My lawn was trimmed, and my house wore the HOA-approved beige. I wanted peace, time with Leo, and freedom to work on cars, but I saw the shift. Seniors living on pensions were fined $100 for leaning mailboxes. Young families lost sleep over the right shade of trim. Karen reigned with cruelty. HOA meetings turned from casual chats into tribunals, where she ruled with the gavel she bought, after punishing someone over unauthorized petunias. Richard sat by her, puffed up with pride, drinking in her dominance. Most Saturdays, I'd see them patrolling the neighborhood, Karen clutching her clipboard, Richard carrying a tape measure, scrutinizing everything. They weren't fostering a community. They were constructing a fiefdom. My first clash with them, before the confrontation involving Leo, came over Bessie. One afternoon, I had her parked in the driveway, freshly waxed and gleaming. I was sipping something cold on the porch when Karen and Richard stopped in front of my house. Their expressions weren't impressed. They were disgusted. Karen stared at Bessie like she was scrap metal. Richard, though, he looked different, envious, possessive. I've seen guys admire vintage trucks, but he looked like he needed to own her. A week later, the first violation letter showed up. Vehicle does not comply with aesthetic guidelines. I laughed. But then came another, and another. That's when I realized. They didn't just dislike the truck. They wanted her gone. Bessie, the soul of my home, clashed with the pristine, lifeless world they were building. She reminded them of what they couldn't dominate. After the incident with Leo, I knew things would escalate. They had failed to barge into my home, failed to label my son a criminal. Their next move was obvious. They'd go after Bessie. That was the line they should have never dared to cross. 2 days after the standoff on my lawn, I got a call from the police. Just a formality. Karen had tried filing charges against Leo for assault. The officer on the line sounded indifferent. He explained that, after reviewing Leo's footage and statements, the DA chose not to pursue charges. In fact, Karen had been sternly warned against abusing emergency services and filing false reports. A small win, but a meaningful one. I told Leo. He nodded once, calm as always. Good, he said, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. Satisfaction. He'd stood up to the bully, and she'd flinched. A tense quiet followed for a few days. When I grabbed the mail, I'd notice Karen watching from her window, eyes cold with fury. I'd give a friendly wave, just to twist the knife. For a moment, I thought she might back off. Maybe she'd taken the hint. But I should have known better. Tyrants don't back down, they just get sneakier. The first letter came on a Friday, sealed in one of those formal HOA envelopes meant to knot your stomach. I tore it open and nearly laughed. The complaint, my truck's color, non-compliant vehicle shade. It read, Bessie, a classic factory cherry red from 1978, was apparently too vibrant. The fine, $200. They'd even cited a bylaw I was sure didn't exist before last month. The next week, another envelope arrived. This time, the accusation was an oil leak. I practically live under that truck. She doesn't drip a thing. Still, I grabbed a flashlight and cloth, inspecting every inch of my driveway for 20 minutes. Not a speck. Still, the fine was now $300, with a demand that repairs be completed in 7 days, and they kept coming. One claimed Bessie was a commercial vehicle due to her bed. Another cited her for excessive tire width. Each one was more ridiculous than the last, and each came with a steeper fine. It was slow, calculated sabotage, 1,000 little cuts designed to bleed me dry. She couldn't nail me for the attempted break-in, so she shifted tact, targeting my truck instead, drowning me in a stack of bogus fines meant to financially suffocate me. I knew brushing it off wasn't an option. My brother Dave, the attorney, advised me to handle it the proper way. Document every detail, Frank. He told me, attend the HOA meeting, stay calm, stay logical, build a record. I followed his advice. I snapped photos. I printed Bessie's original factory specs. I organized every fake violation letter into a tidy folder. I planned to be the level-headed guy. When the HOA meeting rolled around, the community clubhouse had the ambience of a hostile courtroom. Karen and Richard sat at the head table, surveying the 10 or so residents like overlords. Most of the people present had their own minor grievances. Karen presided with cold efficiency, brushing aside complaints with a dismissive wave and the crack of her ridiculous gavel. When my name was called, I walked to the front and laid out my case. I was composed. I stuck to the facts. I showed evidence debunking every violation. I kept my tone measured, respectful, just like Dave coached me. Karen watched me without emotion, her lips curled in a condescending smirk. Richard looked like he might burst from smugness. After I finished, there was a moment of silence. I held on to a thin sliver of hope. Maybe reason would win. I was wrong. Karen raised her gavel. Mr. Peterson, she said with feigned concern, Thank you for your presentation." She didn't so much as glance at the evidence. However, our inspection committee has found the violations legitimate. The bylaws are explicit. She turned to the two board members flanking her, both clearly petrified yes men, all in favor of upholding the fines. She asked. Two hands shot up instantly. Motion carries. She chirped. Then she looked directly at me and twisted the knife. And due to the volume of unaddressed violations, the board has agreed to impose the full cumulative penalty. The total now stands at $7,500, payable within 30 days. The number hit like a gut punch. $7,500 for doing nothing more than parking my own truck in my own driveway. This wasn't about some rule or the color of a vehicle. It was a personal vendetta. It was warfare. I stood frozen, fists clenched at my sides. The angry part of me wanted to flip that table, but the calculating side of me stayed in control. "I see," I said, voice low and edged with steel. I gathered my folder, turned, and left without another word. Just as the door shut behind me, I caught Richard letting out a victorious little chuckle. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd been broken. They had no clue what they'd awakened. They'd gone after my son. And now my truck. They weren't up against some quiet neighbor anymore. They were up against a man with nothing to lose. That $7,500 fine wasn't just high. It was crippling. I'm not wealthy. I earn an honest living fixing engines. A hit like that could sink me. I spent a full day simmering, pacing around my garage, glaring at Bessie, the heart of this whole war. The fury inside twisted like a blade. My first impulse, do something reckless. Smash her headlights, slash the tires, but that's what Karen wanted. She wanted me to crack, to prove her narrative of the violent brute. Instead, I called Dave. He listened as I recounted the sham tribunal. "They can't do this, can they?" I asked, frustration in every word. A long pause. Then, "Frank?" He said grimly, legally, it's a gray area. HOA are granted disturbing amounts of authority. We could take them to court, but it'd cost thousands and drag on for years. If the fines go unpaid, they can file a lien against your home, even attempt foreclosure. Lien foreclosure. The words struck like a sledgehammer. They weren't just levying fines. They were going after my house, the place Leo and I rebuilt our lives in after Sarah died. Dave was right. The legal road was a trap. They'd drain me dry while they sat safe in their fortress. I realized then, playing by their rules was a fool's game. I'd have to write my own. Step 1, gather intel. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was behind enemy lines. I needed information, allies. I began with the folks who'd been at that HOA ambush. They were wary at first. Karen had terrorized this neighborhood for years. Even being seen near me made them nervous. But I didn't give up. I found one of them, Mrs. Gable, a sweet older lady, at the grocery store. I explained what they were doing to me, the $7,000 fine. Her eyes grew wide. Then she confessed. They'd fined her $500 over the unapproved tone of her wind chimes. Right there, in the canned goods aisle, we traded stories. Same tactics. Fake infractions, made-up rules, over-the-top penalties. She was scared, yes, but she was also furious. I had my first recruit. But my greatest asset came in the form of my eccentric neighbor, Buddy Carl. Carl lives 2 doors down. He's a retired mailman, a bit of a character. Most days, he's on his porch, rocking in his chair, binoculars around his neck. Claims he birdwatches, but I know he's watching more than sparrows. He sees it all, who gets deliveries, who comes and goes, who's late to work. He's the street's unofficial surveillance. I showed up with a 6-pack of his favorite brew and spilled the whole story. He listened closely, slowly nodding, his expression thoughtful. After I finished, he took a swig and grumbled, "Karen and that weasel husband of hers, rotten to the bone." Then he dropped a bombshell. He described a white van marked Executive Contracting Solutions that showed up at Karen's place every week, always after dark. A man with a briefcase would enter and stay exactly 1 hour. Bit odd. Buddy muttered, contractor doing house calls at 10 p.m. It wasn't much, but it was the thread. While I chased it down, Karen and Richard upped the pressure. The official lien notice arrived in the mail, a cold, clinical letter that made my stomach turn. They were serious. They were really trying to take my home. Every time I left the house, I felt their eyes on me. And then one morning I spotted it. A small pool of dark fluid beneath Bessie's engine. But it wasn't oil. It was thick, and it was thick and dark like syrup. Someone had poured it there overnight, a clear setup. I scrubbed it away before anyone could notice, my pulse racing with a mix of anger and dread. That night, I called Dave again, my voice tight with tension. "They're setting me up, Dave. They're trying to steal my house, and the law is not doing a damn thing." He was quiet for a while. Dave believed in rules and justice, but he was my brother first. The system moves slow, Frank. He finally said, "People like her know how to work it. Watch yourself. They want you to slip up." He was right. It was all a trap. They were poking and provoking, hoping I'd crack and give them something they could use. The legal route was a dead end. Ahead, on-clash would only play into their hands. I felt trapped, like a wolf caught in a snare. The pressure was unbearable. My home, my job, Sarah's memory, Leo's future. It was all at stake. After I hung up, I looked out at Bessie, her red paint glowing under the porch light. They assumed she was my weakness. They thought my attachment to that truck would be my undoing. But as I stood there, something shifted in me. A cold, calculated resolve settled in. They had forced me out of the world of order and law. But in this new battlefield, I held the upper hand. They believed Bessie was the prize. They were about to discover she was the trap. All I had to work with was Carl's Tip Executive Contracting Solutions. The name reeked of bland corporate nonsense, made to be forgotten. But the midnight visits and the man with the briefcase, that was something else. My days were spent fixing cars, but at night I was glued to my laptop, buried in state records and company filings. I wasn't a detective, but I knew how to solve. Engines were just puzzles, and this crooked HOA, just another puzzle to solve. I started by researching the company. It was listed as an LLC. The address, just a P.O. box in a nearby town, a dead end, the agent of record, a name I didn't recognize. Another wall. For days, I hit nothing but dead ends. The clock was ticking on that absurd fine, and the looming lien felt like a weight pressing on my chest. Time was running out. I had to switch tactics. Instead of chasing the company, I looked into Karen's maiden name. Before she married that snake, Richard, a bit of digging through old social media accounts turned it up. I entered it into the state's business registry, expecting nothing. But then, bingo, a small, obscure company filing from 5 years ago, dissolved long ago, listed under Karen's cousin, and who was the co-owner, the same man listed as executive contracting's agent. A thread, but a real one. My heart pounded. I felt like a gumshoe stumbling on his first break. Now I had a name and a family connection that changed things. I searched the contractor's name again, this time pulling up online reviews. They were awful. Complaints about terrible work, inflated bills, jobs left unfinished. But among them were a few glowing 5-star reviews, all from my neighborhood. That's when things began to click. I visited Mrs. Gable again, the one with the wind chimes. I asked if she knew others who'd been fined. She gave me a few names. For the next 2 days, I tracked them down. Quiet chats in parking lots and grocery stores. A clear pattern surfaced. A man cited for a crack in his driveway. A young family written up for a leaning fence. Every notice came with a recommendation. Use this approved contractor. It was always Executive Contracting Solutions. Those who hired him saw the issue vanish. Those who didn't were told their fix wasn't up to code and fined again. Classic extortion. Karen wasn't on a power trip. She was running a racket. Fake violations followed by mandatory repairs from her cousin's company. The fines were small change. The real cash was in the repairs and kickbacks. The wind chimes were just the surface. $5 fine turned into $1,000 fence job or $2,000 driveway repair. The entire HOA was a front. The rules, the tickets, the clipboard, the gavel, it was a scheme to milk the neighborhood. That night, I sat in my garage with a pile of printed records, business filings, scathing reviews, and signed notes from others. I had proof: fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. My fury began to cool, replaced by focused purpose. This wasn't just about Bessie anymore. This was about a community held hostage by Karen and her gutless husband. I had the ammo, but I had to be strategic. Going to the cops straight away would tip them off. Karen and Richard would lawyer up, cry misunderstanding, smear my name. They'd drag it out for years and drain me dry. I might win eventually, but not in time to keep my house. This had to be public. Exposing a crime wasn't enough. I needed to expose the Queen. I had to lift the curtain in a way no one could ignore. I had to make the entire neighborhood see her for what she was. The question was how. I sat there staring at the evidence. A plan started to take shape. It was bold, risky, maybe even a little insane, but it was perfect. They'd crossed a line when they targeted Leo and tried to take Bessie. Now I would use their own greed and lies to light the match that would burn their empire down. I saw two paths ahead, one paved with courtrooms and legal briefs, the other a narrow, shadowy road where I'd fight on my terms. I lingered at that fork for hours. All the evidence lay spread out on the kitchen table. Business docs, neighbor accounts, the whole sordid timeline. I called Dave. He was the voice of law and order. I told him everything. It's racketeering. I said, my voice shaky with adrenaline, this is enough to sink them. I could almost hear him nod. It's strong, frank. He said, you take this to the DA, they'll open a case. It's the right move. And he was right. That was the responsible path. Turn it over. Let the legal gears grind. But all I could see were Karen and Richard smirking with their lawyers, delaying justice, spinning lies. I imagined my neighbors scared into silence, their statements dismissed. I saw myself torn apart on a witness stand. Sure, I might win, years from now, but I might lose everything before that. That weekend, Leo came home on a 48-hour pass. He stepped inside, instantly reading the mood. He saw the stacks of paperwork, the look on my face. I sat him down and told him everything, the fake fines, the lien, the shady deal I'd uncovered. I told him about the two paths, Dave's lawful one and the other, darker road I was eyeing. He listened without a word, studying the mess laid out before us. He'd been to war, he knew tactics, he understood enemies. After a long silence he met my gaze. Dad, he said, voice steady, in a fair fight. You play by the rules, but this isn't a fair fight. She's using the rules against you. He leaned forward. You have to pick the battlefield, set the terms, don't let them pull you into their world, into courtrooms and technicalities, build a scenario they can't manipulate. His words hit me harder than any legal counsel. Thick and dark like molasses, the substance had clearly been poured under Bessie during the night. It was a clear setup. I scrubbed it away before anyone could notice, my pulse racing with a cocktail of dread and anger. That evening, I called Dave again, my voice strained thin from the stress. They're setting me up, Dave. They want my house, and the law's not doing anything. There was a pause on his end. Dave, a man built on rules and structure, was silent before replying. The system moves slowly, Frank, he admitted. People like her, they know how to work that to their advantage. You've got to stay sharp. They want you to lash out. He was absolutely right. This was a trap, every bit of it. They were nudging me, poking until I snapped, and handed them the ammo they needed. The legal path was barricaded. Confronting them directly would only serve their game. I felt boxed in, like a wolf caught in a steel snare. The pressure was crushing. My house, my work, the memory of Sarah, and the future I was building for Leo. Everything was at stake. After hanging up, I stared out at Bessie glowing under the porch light, her red paint burning like defiance. They thought my love for her made me vulnerable, but standing there, a new steel settled inside me, cold, deliberate. They dragged me from reason and regulation into unknown terrain. But in that realm, I held the upper hand. They assumed Bessie was the weakness. They were about to realize she was bait. All I had was Buddy Carl's tip, Executive Contracting Solutions. The name was so bland, it could vanish in a crowd. But those odd late night visits and the briefcase, it didn't sit right. By day, I fixed engines. By night, I was elbow deep in databases and registry filings. I wasn't a detective, but I understood machines, and corruption had the same mechanical logic. I looked up the company first. An LLC in state, the listed address, a P.O. box in the next town, useless, the agent on file, a complete stranger, another dead end, days passed. I hit wall after wall, with the fines deadline creeping closer and the lien weighing on my chest like a concrete block. I felt time slipping away. So I pivoted. I stopped looking at the company and started digging into Karen's past, specifically the name she had before marrying Richard. After some harmless social media mining, I had her maiden name. I searched the state business records, expecting another wall, but I found gold. A single dusty filing from 5 years back showed a now dissolved business owned by Karen's cousin, his partner on that filing. The same man listed as the agent for Executive Contracting Solutions. A thin thread, yes, but a thread nonetheless. My pulse picked up. I had the link, Karen's family to the company. With that, I searched the contractor again, this time through reviews. Most were scathing. Floppy jobs, inflated invoices, unfinished work. But nestled among the complaints were 5-star reviews, all of them from within my neighborhood. Something clicked. I returned to Mrs. Gable, the one with the wind chimes. I asked about others who'd been fined. She listed a few names. Over the next couple days, I caught them in parking lots and grocery aisles, speaking quietly. A pattern emerged, a cracked driveway, a leaning fence. Each violation came paired with a recommendation. Use this one contractor, always Executive Contracting Solutions. If they did, the issue magically disappeared. If they chose anyone else, the fix was rejected as non-compliant, and more fines followed. It was textbook extortion. Karen wasn't just power, hungry. She was orchestrating a scam, creating bogus violations and funneling contracts to her cousin. The fees were just smoke. The real money came from the shady repairs. It wasn't about wind chimes. It was about turning fake problems into $1,000 repair bills. The HOA wasn't a community organization. It was a racket, a money machine cloaked in fake bylaws and a gavel. That night I sat in the garage, papers spread in front of me, business records, bad reviews, handwritten testimonies, fraud, collusion, extortion. I had everything. The fury I'd carried for weeks sharpened into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about Bessie anymore. This was about neighbors living under threat. But I knew rushing to the cops wasn't enough. Karen and Richard would lawyer up. They'd call it a mix-up, spin the narrative. They'd bury the truth under lawsuits and stall tactics, smearing my name in the process. It could take years, and I might still lose my house. No, this couldn't just be about catching criminals. I had to dethrone a queen. I needed something undeniable, something explosive, something public. I had to pull back the curtain and let everyone see the puppet master in plain sight. The question was, how, as I sat, staring at the evidence, the answer began to crystallize. The plan was bold, it was dangerous, maybe even a little insane, but it was perfect. They'd declared war when they came after Leo. Now I would use the very greed that fueled them to ignite a fire they couldn't contain. I stood at a fork in my mind. One path was bright, paved with rules. The other twisted into shadows. I hovered at that split for what felt like hours. Then I spread the evidence across the kitchen table and called Dave. He was the steady voice, the legal compass. I told him everything. The scheme, the connections, the shakedowns. This is it, Dave. I said, this is organized crime. This is racketeering. He took a moment. It's solid, Frank, very solid. You bring this to the DA and they'll take it seriously. It's the right way to go. He was right, of course, but all I could picture was Karen and Richard smirking as some high-end lawyer spun delay after delay. I imagined frightened neighbors backing down, their stories picked apart. Sure, justice might come, but only after a long, bloody battle, and I wasn't sure I'd survive it. That weekend, Leo came home on a short leave. He walked in, took one look at the papers on the table, and saw it all in my face. We sat down. I told him everything about the bogus fines, the lien, the shady contractor, the legal fork in the road. He listened silently. When I finished, he didn't speak for a while, just stared at the table. Leo had seen war, he understood tactics, he knew enemies. Finally, he looked me in the eye. Dad, he said, voice calm but firm, in a fair fight, you play by the rules. But this isn't a fair fight. She's using those rules as weapons. He leaned in, his eyes locked on mine. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the battlefield. Don't let them pull you into court, where they have the upper hand. You create a scenario they can't control. And in that moment, his words landed deeper than any legal advice could. It was the ideal spot for a trap. I handed the email to Leo. He read it, his expression going cold. It's a setup, Dad, he said, his voice steady and grim. He's not just after the cash anymore. My instincts screamed the same warning. Richard wasn't a fighter, but desperation could make even a coward dangerous. He wouldn't be alone. We needed to pivot, and fast. What had been a sting operation had now morphed into a counter-ambush. Leo, with the precision of a Marine, slipped into tactical mode. I'll scout the area, he said, and before I could protest, he vanished into the night like smoke. As Leo did reconnaissance, I received a frantic alert from Buddy Carl in our private group chat. Typos everywhere, capital letters flying. Richard talking loud in the yard, heard everything. I dialed him right away. Buddy was whispering frantically, his voice full of adrenaline and urgency. He'd been outside, casually watching when Richard stepped out to take a call, pacing with no idea he had an audience. Buddy had heard it all. Richard had been bragging, laughing. He told the contractor about some clueless rich guy bringing a sack of cash, but that wasn't even the main course. The truck was. Richard instructed the contractor to bring tools. He specifically named a crowbar and a sledgehammer, not for repairs, but for destruction. Their plan was to rob me, then obliterate Bessie, a show of dominance. A final, crushing blow. But then Buddy told me the real reason behind Richard's obsession. It wasn't just bitterness, it was personal. He was talking about some guy named Henderson. Buddy whispered. Said he tried to buy that truck from him years back. Before you even moved in, offered a low price, got laughed off. Richard never forgot that. I couldn't buy it then, he'd said, so I'll wipe it from existence now. And there it was, the last twisted piece of the puzzle. This wasn't about HOA rules or control. For Richard, this had always been revenge. He manipulated his power, hungry wife, weaponized her fury, and aimed it all at me. just to destroy a truck he never owned. His jealousy wasn't just a flaw, it was the fuel for the entire scheme. Leo came back an hour later. His intel confirmed our worst fears. He'd inspected the site, fresh tire tracks alongside old ones. Someone had been there prepping. Hidden behind thick undergrowth, Leo found the perfect surveillance spot. "They'll be waiting," he said. "Total kill zone." I looked at him under the kitchen light, his face carved in shadow. Then at the texts from Buddy detailing Richard's sick plan. The boundary between law and vengeance had vanished. This wasn't about citations or liens anymore. It was raw evil, driven by petty hate. They weren't just coming to break rules, they were coming to break me. They thought they were the predators, setting a trap for a fool. They didn't realize we already knew everything. Their plan, their motive, their tools. They believed they were stepping into their kill zone. And they were, but I wouldn't be the one standing in the middle. Their setup wasn't a complication. It was a blessing. It gave us the perfect scene for the final showdown. That night, the air was still and moonless. The back edge of the neighborhood smelled of wet soil and rot. Ideal for what was coming. Leo and I arrived an hour early. We didn't approach the site directly. We parked on a side road, slipping through the woods unseen. We weren't laying a trap. We were building a stage. Earlier that day, I'd driven Bessie into the heart of the clearing, parking her beneath a flickering, forgotten utility lamp. She stood proudly, red, defiant, and alone. A perfect offering, but not unguarded. With Leo's help, we had mounted 4 battery-powered floodlights in the surrounding trees, wired to a single remote in my pocket. We also hid 3 high-definition cameras in the brush, all aimed at Bessie. One streamed live to a private site my brother Dave had helped set up. Our audience was already watching. Leo melted into the foliage, a phantom in the night. I positioned myself behind a thick oak, my pulse thudding like a war drum. Everything we'd done came down to the next few minutes. At 10:00 sharp, twin beams sliced through the darkness. The white van from Executive Contracting Solutions crept into the lot and came to a stop 30 feet from Bessie. The engine cut, silence returned, 2 doors slammed. Richard emerged, smug and sneering. From the driver's side came the contractor, a hulking man with a greasy ponytail, lugging a heavy canvas sack. They surveyed the area. "See," Richard barked. The coward didn't even show, just left the truck. The contractor grunted. "Where's the money?" Richard pointed at Bessie's windshield. He said, "It's on the dash. Let's finish this. I want to watch her burn." Rage burned in my chest, but I held my ground. It had to unfold. The contractor dropped the bag. It hit the ground with a metallic thump. He reached back and drew a long, sharp car key. Richard's eyes lit up. "Start with the door." He snarled. I wanted to hear it scream. Grinning, the contractor moved closer. Just feet away, he lifted the key, angling it for a long gouge down Bessie's side. My hand tightened on the remote. My muscles were wire. Tight now. I pressed the button. Light exploded. The clearing lit up like noon. The 4 floodlights blazed, throwing both men into an unforgiving spotlight. They froze, shielding their eyes, stunned like rats in a trap. What the contractor yelled, dropping the key. Before they could recover, Leo stepped from the brush on one flank. I emerged from the trees on the other. We had them boxed in. Richard's expression, when as the blinding light faded and Richard's vision adjusted, his face displayed pure shock and dread. His jaw hung slack, skin pale and damp with fear. But the real show was just beginning. Out of the darkness behind the floodlights, shapes began to emerge. Mrs. Gable appeared first, followed by the couple with the leaning fence, then more neighbors, victims of Karen and Richard's tyranny. One by one, they stepped into the light, forming a silent circle around the clearing. Every single person had their phone raised, tiny red record lights glowing like warning signals in the night. They weren't just bystanders, they were witnesses. Richard stumbled backward, panic widening his eyes. The contractor looked ready to bolt. "What the hell is this?" Richard sputtered, swinging his gaze from me to the crowd. As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires broke the silence. Karen's high-end SUV tore into the clearing, spraying dust. She jumped out, stormy fury etched on her face. "Richard, what's taking so long? Did you?" She froze. The floodlights, me, Leo, the silent crowd with phones aimed steadily at her. Her expression cycled rapidly. Confusion, anger, then dawning horror. She erupted into shouting, hurling legal threats, promising to sue, to see us all jailed. But her voice rang empty. It had lost all command. I raised my phone, still on a video call with my brother, who was quietly recording every second. "Smile, Karen," I said, voice calm and ice-cold. "The neighborhood's watching." The blood drained from her face. In a desperate bid to save himself, Richard jabbed a trembling finger in Karen's direction. It was her. He yelled. She planned the whole thing. Karen's head snapped to him, eyes aflame with betrayal. She lunged and slapped him hard across the face. The tyrants were turning on each other. Then came the sound we'd all been waiting for, the rising wail of sirens. The final act of the trap was unfolding. Red and blue lights flashed through the clearing, bringing with them an eerie hush. Karen and Richard stood motionless, pinned beneath the glow of floodlights and patrol car beams, their ugly secrets laid bare. 2 officers stepped out, familiar faces from their visit to my home weeks ago. The senior cop surveyed the scene, a crowd of phone-wielding neighbors, a contractor with a sledgehammer dropped at his feet, and 2 desperate HOA overlords caught mid-collapse. A slow, knowing smile crept across his face. "Well," he said, bone dry, "busy night on the block." My brother had timed the call perfectly. He didn't just dial 911. He called the station directly, explained the crime in progress and the potential danger. He'd ensured the right officers responded, ones who would listen. I stepped forward, handing over my phone still recording. "Everything's on here," I said. "Extortion attempt, conspiracy to destroy property." And that's just the start. Then, one by one, our neighbors stepped up. Mrs. Gable, the fence couple, and others showed the officers their phones, the threats, the stream, the recordings. We handed over a thick file packed with fake invoices and phony HOA warnings. It was too much to deny, undeniable and damning. Karen and Richard didn't say a word. The fear they once wielded had vanished in the glare of a dozen cameras and 2 honest cops. Their empire had crumbled. The officers separated them and started taking statements. The contractor, seeing the writing on the wall, began confessing immediately, desperate to make a deal right there on the dirt. It was over. Karen was escorted into one cruiser, Richard into another. As the cars pulled away, the crowd erupted into applause. It started as a gentle cheer, then grew, louder, freer. It was the sound of a neighborhood finally exhaling. The fallout came fast. Armed with our evidence, the district attorney didn't stop at charges. He opened a full investigation into the HOA financial dealings. The fraud, the kickbacks, the threats, it all surfaced. Karen and Richard were hit with a flood of felony charges. A judge dissolved the HOA entirely and placed it into receivership. My lien was erased, and every bogus fine Karen ever issued was tossed out. Eventually, the victims got their stolen money returned. A week later, we held an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. This time, the room felt different, hopeful. We needed a new HOA president, someone fair. To everyone's surprise, including his own, someone nominated Buddy Carl. He tried to decline, but the wave of support overwhelmed him. He was elected unanimously. His first move as president, he proposed abolishing every rule Karen had ever written. The motion passed with cheers and clapping loud enough to rattle the windows. A few days later, Leo stood at the door, duffel bag in hand, ready to return to Camp Pendleton. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. He placed a hand firmly on my shoulder and said, "Good work, Dad." Simple words. They meant everything. That afternoon, I sat on the front porch, sun warming my face. Buddy Carl strolled over holding 2 cold beers. He handed me one and settled into the rocker next to mine. "You know," he said, cracking his beer open, "my first official decree is gonna be this. Every driveway must feature at least one classic cherry red truck." I let out a real laugh, a deep, unburdened laugh I hadn't felt in months. I glanced at Bessie, shining in the driveway without a single scratch. She was more than a truck. She was a statement. They'd tried to destroy her to get to me, to shatter my spirit. But instead, she'd become the very thing that wrecked their rotten little empire. I had been shoved to the very edge of legality and vengeance, but I never stepped over. I used their own darkness to drag them, screaming, into the light. Justice doesn't always wear a robe or sit behind a bench. Sometimes it shows up with a phone camera, a circle of fed-up neighbors, and one stubborn mechanic who refuses to back down when his son and his truck are on the line.